In the spring of 1980, a woman in Stanton, California named Dorothy Jane Scott has her life turned upside down when she starts getting these weird phone calls. On the other end of the line is this man. It's the very same man every time telling her that he loves her now. These calls, even though you know he's presumably saying nice things. I mean, these giving shivers down Dorothy's spine, because not only is he saying inappropriate things for someone who doesn't know her, but he also tells her that he's been following her and lists off these details about her daily life. Like things that he only knows if he really was watching her. And as you can imagine, Dorothy is super freaked out by these calls and starts to worry about her safety, and not just for her own sake either, but for her aunt, who she lives with, and for her 4-year-old son, Shanti, with who she's raising by herself. As the weeks go by, the calls start to get even worse. Dorothy gets a call while she's at work, telling her to go outside because the caller has something for her now, even though she is terrified. I mean, this is a terrible idea. She needs to know who's doing this. So Dorothy goes outside, and right there on the windshield of her car is a single dead rose. Did she call the police to report any of this? I didn't find a clear answer one way or another on that. But like, what I do know, though, is that no matter what she does, try to stop the harassment. Whether that's getting the police involved or not, the calls don't stop. And as creepy as the dead rose is, the situation on Lee escalates. The caller's messages take a dark shift from love confessions to threats of violence and murder. Dorothy starts taking karate classes and even starts thinking about buying a gun for protection. But in the end, she decides not to because she's afraid Shanti might accidentally hurt himself, so pretty much her entire family, except for her young son because he's so little like, knows about what Dorothy is dealing with. As her parents understand, like the stock has been going on, her friends and family. And in May of 1980, she tells her mom, Vera, and her dad, Jacob, about one call in particular that, just like I mean, they're all crossing the red line. The caller said, quote, "Okay, now you are going to come my way. And when I get you alone, I will cut you up into bits, and no one will ever find you." End quote. Oh, my God, that's freaking scary. Yeah, and she just really put like a rotten cherry on top of everything. In that same call, he also described the very outfit that Dorothy had on that day. Like, just to prove this isn't like some kind of weird joke. Or like, I am actually watching you. Yeah, I am actually near her and have access to her. Unfortunately, as many people listen to this, probably know, the horror and anxiety of being stalked don't mean regular life stops. Like, Dorothy still has to go to work. On the evening of May 27, 1980, she leaves Stanton, where she lives with Shanti, and drives into her parents' house in Anaheim to babysit him while she goes to a meeting. So that's what I'm going with here, anyway. Dorothy's a secretary for the Swingers Sight Club and Custom Johns, like these two hippie gift shops in Anaheim owned by the same people. And on this night, the whole company is having a staff meeting. Dorothy dropped her son at her parents' house and goes to this meeting around 9 p.m. and like any small company, this group of colleagues is kind of, almost like all after each other's business. So at this meeting, Dorothy and one of her co-workers, Pam, actually see that one of their other co-workers, this guy named Conrad, like, isn't looking so good. One of his arms looks pretty messed up with this big red streak going down it, and of course, they want to know what's going on with him. And both Pam and Dorothy are like, "Do you like, need to get that checked out?" They did it, but he brushes them off like, "I'm fine." But Pam and Dorothy keep telling him like, "No, this is not looking good. You need to see a doctor. It's already bad." And so finally, he agrees. While on the way, they stop off at Dorothy's parents' house so that she can check in on Shanti. Pam and Dorothy get Conrad to the hospital, which is at the UC Irvine Medical Center. And it turned out that he'd actually been bitten by a black widow spider. So, like, good thing they got him there. Actually, it's kind of a big deal. And while it's not going to kill him or anything, like, his arm is definitely infected, so they get him taken care of. Eventually, Conrad is discharged from the hospital later that night, and while he's waiting for his prescription, Dorothy offers to get the car to speed these things along. So Pam is getting the prescription filled with Conrad, and once it is filled, they wait for Dorothy. Now, many hospitals have a space for cars to pull up, so patients don't have to walk too far once they're discharged. Usually have, a little awning ramp there. And then the parking lot kind of farther away. So, right outside, Conrad and Pam are waiting for Dorothy to, bring around the car any minute. But Dorothy's car never pulls up. They get tired of waiting, and they leave the hospital building, and they actually head out to the parking lot themselves. To look for her to make sure it's the car broken down. What could be keeping her? And while they're out there, they actually spot Dorothy's car with someone at the wheel. And there's some contradictory information out there about what exactly the car is doing or what happens next, because the Santa Ana Orange County Register reported on June 13 of 1980 that the car was driving away from them. But Pam actually tells the Los Angeles Times the next day about the headlights shining Conrad's eyes, which to me sounds like maybe was driving towards them. But either way, they start waving their hands and calling out to get Dorothy's attention. But instead of slowing down so they can catch up or meeting them where they're at, the car makes a right turn and speeds up when they try and chase after it. He even couldn't see who is driving because again, he's saying that the headlights are so bright, it's kind of dark outside that they can't say anything about the person behind the wheel. Now, even though they're both super unsettled by what just happened, Pam and Conrad try to stay calm there, thinking maybe she got word somehow that something's happened to her son. She has to take off right away, basically coming up with anything they can think of to rationalize why she would just bolt like that. That doesn't make sense. So they go back inside the hospital, hoping Dorothy will just come back and pick them up as soon as she can. So they wait and wait, but there's no sign of her. And finally, after a couple more hours pass, Pam and Conrad, who again still at the hospital waiting, actually tell the UC Irvine campus police that Dorothy is missing, they know something is up now. For whatever reason, the campus police don't see this as a cause for concern. I assume they're saying she's an adult. She just didn't want to take you home, get a cab. But Pam isn't willing to just sit back and take their word for it. So she calls Dorothy's parents to check in and see, if they know what's going on. Did Dorothy come back and check on her son? And when they get a hold of her parents, Dorothy hasn't called them. She hasn't been by. There is nothing for any of them to do except wait, so the rest of the evening goes by with just no word from Dorothy. And then around 4:30 in the morning, this is now May 28th, about 5 hours after Dorothy left the hospital to get her car, police make a disturbing discovery. Yeah, in nearby Santa Ana, just south of Anaheim, around 5 to 10 miles away from the hospital, police find Dorothy's car in an alley. It's empty, it still has stuff, but no sign of Dorothy anywhere. And the car is actually on fire. Her friends and the police fear the worst, that Dorothy has been taken. Everyone in Dorothy's life knew about these phone calls that they'd have to have been worried about. Something terrible happened to Dorothy, but till now all of them just making assumptions. The Scott family spends agonizing several days hoping that they'll hear something, anything about where Dorothy might be, and just praying that she is all right now. There's hardly anything out there about really what's happening with her family or with the investigation in the very earliest days after she goes missing. One of the reasons for this is that as a part of their investigation, the police actually asked Dorothy's family not to say a word about what's going on. In case the person who abducted Dorothy reaches out and tries to make some kind of deal, they don't know if this is a ransom, they have no idea. And as difficult as that has to be, I would imagine you want to get in front of the press and ask anyone where she is. But they agree. They follow policies, advice, and everything stays quiet. That is, until one day, about a week after Dorothy vanished. Her parents, Vera and Jacob, are at their house in Anaheim. When the phone rings, Vera answers the phone, and there is a male caller on the other end of the line that asks her a single question. "Are you related to Dorothy Scott?" Vera answers, "Yes," and then the caller says, "I've got her," and hung up. And at that point, that is enough for Dorothy's parents. Despite what the police say, they're done being quiet, and within a week, Jacob's on record with a local paper, the Santa Ana Orange County Register, going to press on June 12, and this is about 2 weeks now. After Dorothy went missing, now literally the very next day after this paper is published, there's a man on the other end of the line. He refers to Dorothy as quoting his love, and he says, more than once in that call, that he killed her. Don't get me wrong. That's terrifying and awful. But it kind of makes me think that this is probably why the police didn't want them to go to press in the first place. Like this could just be someone who read the article and decides to play this cruel, disgusting joke. I mean, it totally could be, but not in this situation, because the caller actually knows details that haven't been published, not by the Santa Ana Orange County Register, not by anyone else. Like, so you remember how I told you that before Dorothy went to the hospital? She changed her scarf. Yeah, from black to red at her parents' house, and according to Maloney's reporting in the Register that had never been made public at the time that this guy was calling in, and only a small handful of people would actually know that, right? Because I mean, it happened after she left work. So really, only the people she was with, maybe her parents, maybe the people of the hospital. And yet the caller had said that Dorothy was wearing a red scarf, and somehow he also knew that Conrad's arm was infected specifically from a spider bite, which wasn't published either. And maybe the most twisted of all. The caller claims that he was there at the hospital because he says Dorothy herself called hit. He says that he went there to confront her about her, seeing another man, as if Dorothy was cheating on him. And the caller says that Dorothy denied seeing anyone else, but he was convinced that he knew the truth. And he says that's why he killed her. This sounds like this guy believes that he did have a relationship of some kind, at least with Dorothy, which could be totally fabricated. That happens in cases of stalking, but it also could mean that they did have some kind of relationship. Even if it wasn't romantic. It kind of goes along with the idea that maybe she was at least familiar with him. Like she swore that the voice was familiar. She just couldn't place it. Yeah, this sounds like more than a stalker. I mean, it kind of raises a couple of possibilities that this guy isn't lying. And Dorothy really did call him and told him all about the spider bite. Or he was actually there at the hospital watching her closely enough to notice that she had changed the scarf to a different color. And even overhear about the spider bite. Yeah, to me, I think the second option is more likely that he was like there. I don't know how you get close enough to find that out. I don't know if he found all that out after he took Dorothy. Still, I especially believe he was there versus, like, Dorothy, making a call to him like he's saying, because Pam, who was at the that night that Dorothy disappeared, says that Dorothy didn't make any phone calls. So she might have just met this guy, like once in her life, had a totally harmless, normal interaction with her. But something about it flipped that switch in his head. Okay, so I do have a question. Does Dorothy have any creepy ex? Well, according to her family, Dorothy didn't actually date much and at the time wasn't actually seeing anybody. And based on what I read in the Los Angeles Times piece that I mentioned earlier, Shanties, Dad lives out of state, like over in Missouri, and actually just had gotten back from a visit out to Southern California to see his son. So it doesn't seem likely that he was involved. Add to it they've got confirmation from the state police that law enforcement believes the call did come from the man who spent the last few months making Dorothy's life miserable. And the police are basing this off the caller having information on Dorothy. A few people would know, like not something that he could have gotten from newspapers or something else. But other than these horrifying phone calls, police have nothing to go on. And so now, even without proof that Dorothy is dead, everyone knows that the chances of actually finding her alive are getting slimmer and slimmer the more days that pass. But unfortunately, the Scotts can't do anything but just sit and hope and pray. But as if this person, the man who took Dorothy, hasn't done enough damage to their family. He keeps calling Vera and Jacob, of course, to tell the police. I mean, they get their phone tapped the whole 9 yards, but the person on the other side is really careful to never stay on the line long enough for police to trace them, just long enough to taunt them about Dorothy and basically just twist the knife of their pain before hanging up and vanishing back into the darkness. And we're not talking like a call here, and thereafter, she goes missing. This goes on for years. All through the early 80s. Even though Dorothy's case is ice cold for 4 long years, the Scott family suffers through the uncertainty and mystery caller's cruelty. This man calls their house with taunts every single Wednesday, like clockwork. Sometimes, he says, Dorothy's death, and he killed her. Other times he just asks if she's home. But here's the thing. According to the Freelance Star, Vera always answers the phone until one day in 1984. Dorothy's dad, Jacob, picks up, and something about this seems to shake the person on the other end because, after the time that Jacob picked up, the calls seem just to stop. For several months, the Scotts get something close to peace. But that same year in August, a construction worker doing some digging on Canyon Road in North Anaheim makes a horrifying discovery. There, in the bushes about 30 feet away from the road, are two sets of partially charred bones. One's pretty clearly an animal, but the other is human. Bill Carson reported for the Santa Ana Orange County Register that police find two femurs, an arm, a pelvis, and a fully intact human skull with plenty of teeth. And they also find a turquoise ring and a woman's watch. Within 2 weeks, police can get a positive ID from dental records, and they were able to confirm that the body belongs to Dorothy Scott. Now, at this point, they can't determine a cause of death or even how long her body had been out there. But since her bones were a little charred and that area had wildfires back in '82, they think that she had been there at least a couple of years. Do we know if that area had ever been searched before? There just isn't out enough there about this investigation to actually know for sure. So it's possible they searched that in the early days. It's possible. Not again. I think this is why we have no idea how long she had been out there. We can't even rule that piece out. Even though the investigation continued, and the Scotts are actually finally able to bury their daughter, they don't get any closure because they don't get justice. There are theories, maybe the brother of one of Dorothy's co-workers is responsible for her death. There are lots and lots of theories, but no one has ever been named as a suspect or a person of interest. Both Vera and Jacob Scott passed away without ever knowing what really happened to Dorothy. And to this day, 40 years after her disappearance and murder, no arrests have been made, and the case remains cold. As of 2020, her son, Shanti, who's now going by the name Sean, is alive and still searching for his mother's killer. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in the Midwest, and the all-too-similar nightmare begins to unfold just a few months after Dorothy had vanished.